The Adult Protective Services investigator sat across from my mother in our living room, her notepad open, her expression professionally sympathetic. My mother's voice quivered with practiced vulnerability as she spoke. "I'm afraid of my daughter. She gets rough sometimes. I don't like to say it, but it's true." My brother Declan moved closer to her chair, his hand on her shoulder, like a bodyguard protecting his charge. I set her afternoon tea down on the side table, my movements careful and deliberate, then straightened to meet the investigator's eyes. "You've practiced that line before," I said quietly. "Many times, actually." The room went still. My mother's trembling performance froze mid-gesture. Her carefully constructed mask of fear slipped for just a second, and I saw something else underneath. Something cold and calculating. The investigator's pen stopped moving. Declan's protective stance faltered. And my mother's eyes met mine with the sharp awareness of someone who just realized their script had been exposed. The investigator, a woman named Miss Torres, turned sharply toward me. Her expression shifted from sympathy to professional curiosity. My mother recovered quickly, her voice dropping to a wounded whisper. "She's lying. She always lies about me. It's part of the problem." Her hand reached for Declan's, squeezing it like a lifeline. My pulse stayed steady. I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I discovered what she was planning. "Then let's talk about the day I updated your smart doorbell," I said, keeping my voice calm and clear. Declan frowned, confusion crossing his face. Miss Torres leaned forward slightly, her attention fully on me now. And my mother froze completely. The color drained from her face. Her hand, which had been trembling with practiced fear just moments ago, now shook for an entirely different reason. Real fear. The fear of someone who'd been caught. The fear of someone whose carefully constructed lie was about to collapse around her. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my movements slow and deliberate. "I heard you," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "I heard you explaining to your friend Denise exactly how you'd frame me for elder abuse. Every detail, every manufactured bruise, every rehearsed line." Silence detonated through the room like a bomb going off in slow motion. Miss Torres sat up straighter, her professional mask slipping into something sharper, more alert. Declan's hand dropped from my mother's shoulder. And my mother, Judith Pierce, the woman who'd given birth to me 48 years ago, sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking like a mask over her pale skin. Her hand trembled, this time genuinely, as she reached for her water glass and missed. "That's ridiculous," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Miss Torres looked between us. "Miss Pierce, I think you need to explain what you mean by that statement." I met Miss Torres's eyes directly. "My name is Lauren Pierce. I'm 48 years old. 6 months ago, I left my quiet life in Seattle and a stable job as a data analyst to move back home to Spokane and care for my mother." My voice was calm, factual, the way I'd practiced in front of my bathroom mirror 100 times. "I gave up my apartment, my career trajectory, my independence, because my brother called and said Mom needed help." Miss Torres made notes, her pen moving quickly. "When did you first suspect your mother was planning something?" The question hung in the air between us. I glanced at my mother, who sat perfectly still now, her performance abandoned, her real self visible in the hardness of her eyes. "Let me take you back," I said. "Let me show you exactly what I discovered and how I discovered it. Then you can decide for yourself what's really happening in this house." It had been a Tuesday afternoon in late September, cold wind cutting through my jacket as I stood on my mother's front porch, installing her new smart doorbell. My hands were numb, my phone screen bright in the gray afternoon light as I synced the device through the app. The installation was simple enough. Download app, connect to Wi-Fi, sync camera and audio. A notification popped up on my screen, new audio clip recorded. I frowned. The doorbell shouldn't have been recording yet. I was still in setup mode, but curiosity made me tap the notification, and suddenly my mother's voice filled my earbuds, clear and sharp and completely unaware she was being recorded. "No, listen, Denise, this is how I'll make it believable." My entire body went rigid. I stood there on the porch, one hand still holding the doorbell mounting bracket, the other gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white. Every cell in my body started vibrating with a mixture of shock and disbelief. This couldn't be what it sounded like. But I kept listening. My mother's voice continued, casual and calculating in equal measure. The bruises need to be visible but explainable. I'll accidentally bang into things when she's around. Make sure someone sees them before they fade. A pause. Then Denise's voice uncertain. Judith, are you sure about this? My mother laughed, soft and cold. She'll look controlling. Adult Protective Services loves stories like that. Daughter moves in, takes over, gets rough when mom doesn't cooperate. Classic elder abuse pattern. I felt sick. Actually physically sick. My stomach churning as I stood there in the cold wind, listening to my mother outline my destruction, like she was planning a dinner party. And the medications? Denise asked. I'll forget to take them when she hands them to me. Then tell the doctor she's managing my pills wrong, getting confused, maybe mixing things up. Shows incompetence at minimum, negligence at worst. The recording clicked off. I stood there frozen, my mind trying to process what I just heard. My mother had rehearsed my collapse, planned it, scripted it, and she had no idea I knew. I went inside 5 minutes later, my face composed, my shock buried deep where she couldn't see it. My mother looked up from her crossword puzzle, smiling warmly. All done with the doorbell, sweetheart? Her voice was honey sweet. Thank you for taking care of that. You're so helpful. I don't know what I'd do without you. She stood and hugged me, her arms thin but strong around my shoulders. Her hands felt cold and calculated against my back. I almost confronted her right then, almost threw the recording in her face and demanded to know what the hell she was thinking. But something stopped me. Some instinct born from years of being her daughter, of knowing how she operated, how she manipulated. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. Claim the recording was taken out of context, or that she was joking, or that I doctored it. She'd turn it around somehow, make me the villain. So instead, I smiled back, squeezed her shoulder gently, and made a decision. I would watch. I would document. And she would never see it coming. The whispers started small, almost imperceptible at first. At the pharmacy, the tech who'd filled prescriptions for my mother for years asked me if caregiving was stressing me out. You know, there are support groups for that. Sometimes people don't realize how hard it gets until they're already overwhelmed. At the grocery store, Mrs. Kowalski from down the street stopped her cart next to mine. Your mother mentioned she's been feeling a bit frightened lately. Are you doing okay, dear? Each conversation felt slightly off, like lines being delivered from a script I hadn't been given. I started logging them in my phone. Date, time, person, exact words. The pharmacist, September 28th, 3:15 p.m., Miss Kowalski. October 2nd, 10:47 a.m. The pattern became clear. The rumors felt rehearsed because they were. My mother was seeding the narrative, spreading her version of events before anything had actually happened. Creating witnesses who would remember seeing warning signs, building her case brick by brick. Adult Protective Services made their first visit on October 15th. My mother acted startled when the investigator, a different one than Miss Torres, appeared at our door. Oh my goodness, who called you? I didn't want to bother anyone with this. Her hand fluttered to her throat, the gesture of distress she'd probably practiced. But yes, if I'm being honest, I am scared sometimes. Her eyes flicked toward me with perfect theatrical timing. Wounded, vulnerable, afraid. I stayed calm. I'd been preparing for this since I heard the doorbell recording. I presented my detailed medication logs, showing every pill I'd administered, every dose, every time. I showed the calendar where I'd marked all her doctor's appointments. Every one attended. I showed the grocery receipts, the cleaning schedule, the care plan her physician had approved. The investigator looked through everything with professional neutrality, made some notes, asked a few questions, then left. Unconvinced, but curious. I could see it in her eyes. Something here didn't add up, but she hadn't figured out what yet. Declan called me that evening. Mom says you're getting overwhelmed. She's worried about you, says maybe you're becoming unstable. The old childhood hierarchy snapped into place instantly. Declan, 3 years younger, had always been Mom's golden child. His word was law in our house growing up. Mom's word was gospel. My word was whatever didn't contradict theirs. Declan, that's not what's happening here, I started, but he cut me off. Maybe I should take over the medical decisions, just until you get your head straight. You've been under a lot of stress, moving back, changing your whole life. No one would blame you if it got to be too much. I gripped the phone tighter. Has she told you why I moved back? What her actual condition is? Silence. She's fine, Lauren. Maybe a little forgetful, but fine. You might be overreacting to normal aging. He hadn't read my documentation, hadn't asked to see the care plan, had just accepted Mom's version as truth. Of course he had. He always did. Late evening, 3 days later, I was in my room when I heard my mother's voice carrying through the hallway. Clear. Distinct. Practicing. I froze, my book forgotten in my lap. I crept to my door, opened it a crack, and listened. I'm afraid of her, my mother said to the empty living room. Pause. She grabs my arm when I don't do what she wants. Another pause, longer this time. I don't want to cause trouble, but I think she might hurt me. She was alone, completely alone. Rehearsing her lines like an actress preparing for opening night. Testing inflections, trying different emotional beats. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Documented the date, the time, the fact that she was alone. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't confusion or forgetfulness. This was deliberate, calculated performance. And I was gathering every piece of evidence I could find. A week later, my mother showed me a yellow bruise on her forearm. Her smile was strange, not quite reaching her eyes. I'd bumped into the kitchen counter yesterday. Clumsy me. She paused, then added, almost playfully. I could say you did this. Just kidding, of course. Her eyes sparkled with something that wasn't humor. It was malice disguised as whimsy. Testing me. Watching for my reaction. I kept my face neutral. You should be more careful around sharp corners, I said mildly. Then I spent the next hour photographing every narrow corner in the house, every piece of furniture she could have genuinely bumped into. Documented the heights, the angles, the likelihood of each causing that specific bruise pattern. I wasn't a forensic expert, but I was thorough, and I knew that bruise hadn't come from any counter. She'd created it somehow. Pinched herself or used some method I hadn't figured out yet. Nothing about this was a joke. Everything about it was a threat. The bank called me on a Tuesday morning. Miss Pierce, we're calling about a withdrawal from your mother's account. It's unusual, and we wanted to verify it was authorized. $3,000. Withdrawn in cash. I'd known nothing about it. When I asked my mother gently, carefully, her response was immediate and explosive. You're controlling me. You want to know every move I make, every dollar I spend. This is exactly what people have been warning me about. She stormed from the room, slamming her bedroom door. I stood in the kitchen, shaking slightly, and made detailed notes. The financial groundwork was underway. She was creating a pattern of me being controlling, overstepping, managing her money inappropriately. Building a case that I was financially exploiting her, while simultaneously claiming to protect her. The bank representative called back an hour later. Your mother contacted us, said you had no right to question her withdrawals. We just wanted you to know. I thanked them and added it to my documentation. Declan arrived on a Saturday morning with a folder tucked under his arm, looking like he was leading a corporate intervention. My mother sat in her armchair, tissues clutched dramatically in her hands. Declan opened the folder with ceremony. I'd been doing research on guardianship, for Mom's safety, and frankly, Lauren, for yours too. You're clearly overwhelmed. I looked at the papers he'd printed. Legal forms. Guardianship petitions. My mother watched me with wet eyes that held triumph underneath the tears. Have you read any of my documentation? I asked Declan. The medication logs? The care plans? The appointment schedules? He waved a hand dismissively. I've seen enough. Mom's scared, Lauren. That's what matters. My mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to a frightened whisper. Please don't leave me alone with her, Declan. I'm afraid of what might happen when you leave. His face hardened. I saw the moment he fully committed to his decision. Saw the moment I became the villain in the story my mother had been writing for months. 2 days later, Declan suggested my mother move in with him and his wife, Elise. My mother nodded, her eyes glistening with what looked like relief but felt like victory. I stood in the same driveway where her doorbell had recorded her confession, watching them load her suitcase into Declan's SUV. You'll be safe now, Mom, Declan said, his arm around her shoulders. She looked at me over his shoulder, and for just a second, her mask dropped. The triumph in her eyes was undeniable. She'd won phase 1, gotten everyone to believe her narrative, positioned herself as the victim and me as the threat. But as I watched them drive away, I felt something settle in my chest. Not defeat, determination. The story was far from over. She thought she'd won by leaving. She didn't realize she'd just made a critical mistake. She'd given me space to organize, to prepare, to build my case without her watching over my shoulder. Phase 2 was about to begin. I'd helped her pack the night before she left, watching her hum cheerfully as she folded clothes and organized her toiletries. While she was in the bathroom, I slipped into my room and made copies of everything. Every recording, every log, every photograph, every piece of documentation I'd collected over the past 6 weeks. I saved them to 3 different USB drives, backed them up to cloud storage, emailed encrypted files to myself. When I came back to her room, she noticed the USB drive in my hand. "What's that?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "Backup," I said simply, "of your medical records, in case Declan needs them." Her smile flickered for just a second, uncertainty crossing her face. "Oh, that's thoughtful." But I saw the question in her eyes. What else was on that drive? What else had I saved? She didn't ask. Probably afraid of what the answer might be. I left the drive visible on the kitchen counter when I left that night. Let her wonder. At Declan's house, my mother performed her rescue perfectly. I visited 3 days after she'd moved in, bringing some items she'd forgotten. Elise answered the door, her smile polite but cool. Inside, my mother sat in their living room like a refugee who'd finally found sanctuary. "I feel safe here," she told Elise, her voice carrying just enough emotion. "After everything, it's such a relief." Elise looked at me with poorly concealed suspicion, like I was a threat that had been allowed into their home under supervised conditions. I offered to go over my mother's medication schedule, to explain the timing and dosages. "Thanks," Elise said, her tone making it clear she didn't mean it, "but we'll handle it from here. We've got everything under control." My mother watched this exchange with barely concealed smugness. They'd bought her story completely. Declan emerged from his home office, his greeting to me formal and distant. I was no longer his sister. I was the problem they'd solved by removing her from my care. My manager called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. Her expression was careful, neutral, in that way that meant something bad was coming. Adult Protective Services contacted HR. They asked if you'd shown any signs of instability at work. Stress, emotional outbursts, anything concerning. My reputation, my livelihood, now part of my mother's narrative. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap. "And what did you tell them?" My manager looked uncomfortable. "That you've always been professional, reliable. But Lauren, they asked for a reason. Is there something going on we should know about?" I explained carefully, factually. "Family situation. Mother requiring care. Some disagreement about approach." My manager nodded slowly. "Take whatever time you need, but if this escalates, I need to know." Driving home, I felt something click into place. My mother was escalating, expanding her attack beyond just family into my professional life. So I would escalate too. But morally, calmly, smartly, using truth instead of lies. That evening, I spread everything across my dining table. 6 weeks of documentation. Audio recordings, photographs, medication logs, financial records, witness statements I'd carefully collected, timeline spreadsheets showing the progression of her campaign. I organized it all methodically, creating a narrative that was undeniable. Then I composed an email to Adult Protective Services. Professional, factual, no accusations, no emotional language. Just, I have documentation relevant to the concerns that have been raised regarding my mother's care. I believe this information may provide important context for your investigation. I'm available at your convenience to discuss. I attached a summary document, carefully organized, with references to supporting evidence I could provide upon request. No drama, no shouting, just facts. Organization, truth. I hit send at 9:47 p.m. and felt something shift in my chest. I was done being passive. Done being the character in my mother's script. It was time to write my own ending. The case conference happened in a small room at the APS office. Miss Torres was there, along with another investigator I didn't recognize. Declan and Elise sat on one side of the table. My mother sat between them, tissues ready. I sat alone on the other side. My mother began her trembling monologue, the one I'd heard her practice in our living room. I tried to hide it for so long. I didn't want to cause trouble. But Lauren became so controlling. She'd grab my arm if I didn't do what she wanted fast enough. I waited, listened, watched her deliver each line exactly as she'd rehearsed it. When she reached the specific phrase, "I'm afraid of what might happen if I'm left alone with her," I lifted my phone. "I'd like you to hear something," I said calmly. "I'd like you to hear my mother practicing this exact speech, word for word." The color drained from my mother's face. "What recording?" Her voice came out strangled. "The one you made, Mom. Well, the one your new smart doorbell made. The one where you explained to Denise exactly how you'd frame me for elder abuse." Miss Torres looked at me, then at my mother, then back to me. "Play it." I connected my phone to the conference room speaker, pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, clear and calculated. "No, listen, Denise, this is how I'll make it believable." The whole conversation played out. The bruises she'd create, the medications she'd forget, the way she'd paint me as controlling, her laughter, her casual discussion of destroying my reputation, my career, my life. Then the second recording, her practicing alone in the living room, testing different inflections, rehearsing her fear. When the audio stopped, the room was silent. Elise had stopped breathing. Declan looked physically sick, and my mother sputtered, her performance completely abandoned. "That's out of context. It was a joke. We were just talking hypothetically." Miss Torres's expression was ice. "It's time-stamped September 24th, 2 weeks before your first APS complaint. That's not hypothetical. That's premeditation." Nobody believed her. Not anymore. APS brought Denise in for questioning the next day. I wasn't there, but Miss Torres called me afterward. "Your mother's friend was terrified of being implicated. She admitted everything." Denise had detailed how my mother had been workshopping her elder abuse story for months, how she'd asked Denise to help her make it believable, how she'd tested different versions, refined her approach, planned every detail. "I thought she was joking at first," Denise had apparently said, but she kept going back to it, refining it. She seemed almost excited about it. Miss Torres's voice was tight with controlled anger. "This appears to be deliberate manipulation, Miss Pierce. We're shifting our investigation focus accordingly." The foundation of my mother's narrative cracked wide open. The victim became the perpetrator. The concerned daughter became the actual victim. And everything she'd built collapsed around her like a house of cards caught in a strong wind. Declan hired an elder law attorney, wanting to understand his options now that the truth was emerging. The attorney reviewed my mother's financial records and discovered something that made him call an immediate meeting. My mother had rewritten her will 3 months ago, 2 weeks before I'd moved back to help her. I was written out almost entirely, left a token $1,000. But it was the language that was damning. The will included specific provisions given my daughter Lauren's concerning behavior and potential danger to my well-being. Creating legal documentation of abuse that hadn't happened yet. Establishing a paper trail that would validate her future claims. The timing matched her planning perfectly. She'd been setting this up long before I'd even agreed to move home. This wasn't a response to my caregiving. This was premeditated from the start. Declan sat in the attorney's office, staring at the documents, his face gray. "My God," he whispered. "She planned all of this." The attorney nodded grimly. "And if it had worked, she would have gotten away with it." Adult Protective Services petitioned the court for emergency intervention. A temporary guardian was appointed to oversee my mother's care and finances while the investigation continued. For a week, I thought the nightmare might actually be over. That truth had won, that I could begin rebuilding my life. Then the process server appeared at my door with a civil complaint, filed by Judith Pierce against her daughter, Lauren Pierce, alleging financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult, seeking damages of $50,000. My mother's final play. If she couldn't win with APS, she'd try to win in civil court. Drag me through a public trial, force me to spend money on lawyers, destroy my reputation, even if she ultimately lost. I read the complaint with shaking hands, then called the attorney Declan had recommended. "She's not gonna stop," I said. The attorney's voice was calm. Then neither will we. And Miss Pierce, we have something she doesn't. What's that? The truth. During the investigation, the court-appointed guardian did what I'd never had the authority to do. A complete forensic audit of my mother's finances going back 10 years. What they found was staggering. Unexplained withdrawals dating back to my father's death 8 years ago. Checks made out to cash, amounts that didn't match any legitimate expenses. Over $100,000 missing from accounts that should have been much larger. The guardian brought Declan and me into a conference room and spread out the evidence. Bank statements, withdrawal receipts, patterns of financial behavior that suggested systematic deception long before I'd entered the picture. Declan stared at the documents, his face devastated. She told me Dad spent it all on medical bills before he died. The guardian shook her head. Your father's medical expenses were largely covered by insurance. These withdrawals happened after his death, and they continued until Miss Lauren moved in and started monitoring the accounts. My mother's lies didn't start with me. They probably didn't start with Dad. This was who she'd always been. 2 weeks later, my mother called 911 from Declan's house, claiming her aide had pushed her. She was hysterical on the call, sobbing about being hurt, being afraid. But Declan had installed indoor security cameras after learning the truth about her, unable to trust anything anymore. The authorities reviewed the footage. It showed my mother standing alone in the hallway, looking around carefully, then lowering herself to the floor with deliberate, controlled movements. Sitting there for a moment, composing her expression, and then beginning to cry, practicing her distress before picking up her phone. Help me, please. She pushed me. I'm hurt. Except there was no aide in the house. No one had touched her. She'd staged the entire thing. Declan watched the footage in his living room, his wife Elise beside him, both of them silent. When it ended, Declan whispered, "My God, she's been doing this for years, hasn't she? How many times did we believe her? How many people did she destroy that we never knew about?" A quiet war ended inside him. The war between the mother he'd wanted to believe in and the reality he could no longer deny. The courtroom was small, functional, and packed with evidence. 3 months after my mother's initial accusation, everything converged in front of Judge Patricia Reeves. The audio recordings played through the court speaker system. My mother's voice explaining her plan, her laughter, her calculated cruelty. The financial records were presented, showing the missing money, the timeline, the patterns. The staged fall footage was shown on a screen, my mother lowering herself down, practicing her distress. Denise's written statement was entered into evidence, detailing months of workshopping the abuse narrative. My mother attempted one last trembling performance, claiming she'd been confused, scared, manipulated by medications. Judge Reeves wasn't moved. Her expression was granite. "Miss Pierce, I've reviewed everything. The pattern is clear. This was deliberate, systematic manipulation." She ruled that my mother was no longer capable of managing her own affairs due to demonstrated patterns of deception and manipulation. A permanent neutral guardian was assigned. Her will was suspended pending complete review. All accusations against me were dismissed with prejudice. And for the first time in my entire life, my mother could not control the narrative. I walked out of that courtroom free. The phone calls started within days. Relatives who'd heard various versions of the story. Some apologized, their voices uncomfortable. We should have listened to both sides. Most found ways to avoid admitting they'd believed her lies. Well, you know how families can be complicated. Elise broke down crying when we met for coffee, her hands shaking as she held her cup. "I'm so sorry, Lauren. I judged you so harshly. I believed everything she said without question." Declan was hollow, grieving not the mother he'd lost, but the mother he'd never really known. "How did I not see it?" he asked me one evening, his voice raw. "All those years, all those times she turned me against you or Dad or someone, and I never questioned her. I wanted to be angry at him. Part of me was, but mostly I just felt tired. And I released them all. Released the anger, the hurt, the need for them to fully understand. Freedom I was discovering tasted quiet, like peace, like finally being able to breathe. The guardian called me 6 weeks after the court ruling. "We found something in your mother's personal effects. A letter from your grandmother to your father. It was never sent, but I think you should read it." The letter was dated 3 years before my father died, written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. I read it with trembling hands, sitting alone in my apartment. William, I know you won't believe me. You never do when it comes to Judith, but I'm watching what she's doing to those children, how she turns them against each other, how she creates conflicts and then plays the victim. It's her talent, that victimhood. She's been doing it since she was a girl. The letter went on, detailing patterns my grandmother had seen. The way my mother manipulated situations, created dramas, positioned herself as the wronged party. She's turning Declan into her defender and Lauren into her scapegoat. Someday the truth will come out. I pray someone is there to document it when it does. I folded the letter carefully. The story began long before me. But I was the one who stopped it. I visited my mother 4 months later. The care facility was comfortable, well-staffed, clean. She sat in a chair by the window, her hair perfectly styled, her clothes expensive. Still maintaining her image, still performing, even with no audience that mattered. She looked up when I entered, her expression cycling through emotions, anger, calculation, finally landing on something that might have been strategic vulnerability. "Lauren," she said softly, "I'm glad you came. I've been thinking." I sat down across from her, calm and centered in a way I'd never been in her presence before. "About what?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "If you drop everything, all these ridiculous accusations, I'll rewrite the will. Put you back in. We can start over. Go back to how things were." I looked into the eyes of the woman who'd given birth to me. The woman who'd spent months planning my destruction. Who'd weaponized elder abuse laws to frame her own daughter. Who'd probably been manipulating people her entire life. And I felt nothing but clarity. "I don't need your will," I said softly. "I just needed the truth to stop being your victim." I stood, squeezed her hand once, and walked toward the door. "Goodbye, Mom." I didn't look back. Didn't need to. For the first time in 48 years, I was free. Free of her narratives, free of her manipulation, free of the character she'd tried to write for me. Sometimes, the most dangerous lies are the ones told by the people who raised us, and sometimes the bravest act isn't revenge. It's simply refusing to become the villain in someone else's story. I walked out into the sunlight, toward a life that was finally, completely, mine.